Well, if we could get two people to stand and just hold it like this for the presentation. Just kidding.
The two deck, maybe raise it up one step.
You have spotlights? So we could put a spotlight there. The skylight that maybe lights out. I will leave my laptop. Like that?
No, okay.
I just talk right off the slide.
No, just making sure. And you will be here.
I'll wander around. There are things I want to point out too.
Okay, perfect. I will get you for planning to. So formed it seems. So I'm just putting it here. Don't worry. Okay. I just
And can we put this somewhere else? Well, from the, this is good.
I'll put this behind it just so that I can read.
Sure. Thank you. You don't mind if I take my mask off?
Yeah.
Thank you. We're all social distancing, right? Okay. So are we getting contact? Is that coming through? Did not push the button right. How's that? Now it's coming through. So good afternoon. Welcome to, well, your own home parish. And I'd like to thank Father Raja for inviting me here to present some of my research that I've done on the Shroud of Turin, which is the most amazing artifact of Christianity. So I like to always begin, my name is Ed Hecker, by the way. I've spent 35 years teaching with Edmonton Catholic schools, mostly in elementary. And one of the things that I like to talk about to my students at one point in the year anyway is the Shroud of Turin. And it was my desire to share it with them that ultimately evolved into what you're going to see today. They never got it as good as this is. Just saying. Okay, so, Father, if we can start with this, and then if you want to add any other prayer, that'd be just wonderful. So let us begin with
Shall we begin with a short prayer? In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Heavenly King, Advocate, Spirit of truth, who are everywhere present and fill all things, treasury of blessings, bestower of life, come and dwell within us. Cleanse us of all that defiles us, and open save our souls. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Amen. May the help of Christians, pray for us. Saint John Bosco, pray for us. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. So on your behalf, I'm also happy to welcome Ed. I have known him since I came to Canada for the last 5 years, because he was playing music for us at the Church of Annunciation, the West End, and from then on I knew him. And I really know him well, because he used to come to me for confessions. Later he found out that I was more sinner, so he stopped coming now.
You're too far.
I'm just kidding.
You're too far. You're so far away.
Yes. So nice to have him here this afternoon, and thanks for sharing all your resources, all your knowledge with us. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Welcome.
Thank you very much, Father. So I like to begin with the prayer of the Holy Spirit, because Jesus says that I will send you the Spirit to help you remember things that I taught you, and also to teach you, to console you, and to guide you. So to me, the Holy Spirit is very important to include every day. So let us start. My home parish is actually not Annunciation. It is St. Josaphat Cathedral, which is a Ukrainian Catholic church, and I am Ukrainian Catholic. But we can still go to confession to a Roman Catholic priest. It's all, we're part of the same Catholic family. Now, the light here is kind of washes out my copy of the shroud. So I'm sorry about that, and there isn't much that I can do today to undo that. However, these 4 upright displays are basically the same thing, except that you also get the black and white, which is the negative of this right here, and I'll tell you the story of that. To begin with, that's a little bit. Yeah, you can't have it raking across because it's going to pick up all the folds. It has to come more from the front. So, he's great. He is really good. I am so glad he is here, because I would still be setting stuff up without him. Trust me on this. So, to begin our study today, I have a slide, and this is a picture that is painted on the wall of one of the most beautiful churches we have in Edmonton, St. George's Ukrainian Catholic Church. The art in there is absolutely fabulous. And you should look at that and say, my, that is strange. Why would they paint just the face of Jesus onto a cloth? The walls in that church are all nice white plaster, kind of like what you have around here, and but it's kind of like plaster. So the paintings on there are just beautiful. But why would someone bother putting a cloth there? And then the face of Jesus, no neck, no shoulders, just the face. And you need to know too that in every church, everything that we celebrate, everything that we put here has roots in history. And that's what some of the people today don't really get. They think that when you walk in the door of that church, we're into the land of make-believe. But we aren't. This church is named after St. John Bosco, who's one of my favorite saints ever. He lived. He was a real human being. He was a priest. And we've got his history, and we've got documented miracles that happened in his life as he served the young orphans on the streets and brought them into his home. He established trade schools for the boys. He did things for these kids that no one else was doing. And his main goal, though, was to bring them to heaven. There is nothing more important than that. And heaven is real. And that's where a lot of people nowadays, they wonder about that. They can make up everything, which is too bad. You have the Stations of the Cross over there. Every one of those things happened in the life of Christ. They are real. Throughout the year, we celebrate different Sundays. In the Eastern tradition today, this is Lazarus Saturday. It's very important. That's when Jesus brought Lazarus back to life. And tomorrow is the day that we celebrate Palm Sunday, where he decides to go from Bethany, where Lazarus is, and he's going to go into Jerusalem. And everybody's telling him, don't go there. They want to kill you. And who is the one that speaks up and says, when Jesus definitely's got his mind set up to go to Jerusalem anyway, he says, let us go with him and die with him there. Do you know which apostle said that? The one who gets the next set of bad raps after Judas. Thomas. Doubting Thomas. And we miss that. That's courage. He was going to go there to die with Jesus. He was the one that spoke up, not Peter. So when they say, doubting Thomas and put him down, you got to remember he's got some really good stuff in there. Anyways, all those things that we celebrate, all the people, the saints that we celebrate, they are real. The miracles that many saints produced, they are real. And if you ever come to St. Joseph's Church, the whole church is covered in murals. So icons of the life of Christ, full size and bigger, of every aspect of his life. So if everything is real that we do here, what is the story behind this? The face that's on a cloth. Well, let me share you some more things. In the Eastern churches, and the Ukrainian Catholic Church is an Eastern church, they share all of the things with the Orthodox churches, except the union with Rome. The Ukrainian Catholic Church is in 100% union with Rome, as are about 30 other Eastern churches. We don't know about that because it's never in the news and nobody ever talks about it. In the Eastern churches, we have what we call the antimines. And the antimines must be placed on the altar in order for the priest to celebrate the Eucharist, to turn that bread and wine into the body and blood of Christ. What's on there? Can you see that? I know some of you are far away. It's Jesus being buried. So you see him on a cloth. And around him, all the main characters that are mentioned in the Gospels, every one of them. You'll see Nicodemus, Joseph of Arimathea, Mary Magdalene, Mary, the mother of Jesus, etc. They're all there. Why did they pick that as being the thing to put on the antimines? Now, this coming Friday, we're going to celebrate Good Friday. In the Roman Church, what is the central symbol of Good Friday? The cross. And poor Father Roger will probably have to carry it from the end of the church up to here, and then you'll set it here to kind of reenact the Via Dolorosa, the way to the cross of Jesus. Do you know what we venerate in the East? The cross, of course, is important. There's no question. We make about 1 million crosses in every sign of the cross, always. And we don't just do one when we start a prayer. It's 3. We're serious about the sign of the cross. But on Good Friday, this is what we venerate. In Ukrainian, it's called the Plashchenitsia. And what is it again? It's Jesus on a cloth. Where did they get that idea that Jesus is on a cloth and he's in death? Like, there's something real behind this, something historical. And what is it? Here is another one. And not only do we venerate this cloth, which represents the burial, death and burial of Jesus, we also process it around the church, outside. And everybody goes in the procession 3 times around the church. Then we bring it all back into the church. It's a funeral procession. We are reenacting a real event in history. Is it possible that this sheet behind me is the source and the idea, the reality behind all of these things that we have just seen? I think so. And where is this cloth mentioned? All the Gospels mention a cloth. So when they talk about the burial of Jesus, in Matthew it says, "When it was evening, there came a rich man from Arimathea named Joseph, who was also a disciple of Jesus. He went to Pilate and asked for the body of Jesus. Then Pilate ordered it to be given to him. And Joseph took the body and wrapped it in a clean linen shroud, and laid it in his own new tomb, which he had hewn in the rock, and he rolled a great stone to the door of the tomb and departed. Mary Magdalene and the other Mary were there, sitting opposite the sepulchre." Mark tells slightly different details, same main story though. "And when evening had come, since it was the day of preparation, that is, the day before the Sabbath, Joseph of Arimathea, a respected member of the council, who was also himself looking for the kingdom of God," so he tells you details. He's on the council, but he didn't share in their decision. So just to be clear about that. "And he took courage and went to Pilate." Why courage? Because Pilate is the procurator, the guy in charge, the governor of Judea. And ordinary people just don't go over there and start talking to him. And he just condemned Jesus to death because of the big noise that the Jewish leaders were making. So there took a bit of courage to go there. And he asked whether he was already dead. So he sent the centurion. So there's going to be a little pause there as the centurion goes out to the death scene, checks him out, probably spears him in the heart at that point, comes back and says, "Yep, he's dead." Because you can't give the body of someone condemned to death if it's still alive. And he bought a linen shroud, and taking him down, wrapped him in the linen shroud, and laid him in a tomb which had been hewn out of the rock, and he rolled a stone against the door of the tomb. Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of Joseph, saw where he was laid. They were watching because it was Friday. Friday is the day before Saturday, which in the Jewish Old Testament times was the holy day, the Sabbath, the Shabbat. And the day in that time began when the sun went down. So already in the evening, you are no longer in Friday, you are on the next day. And it was not allowed to do any work whatsoever, including burying someone on the Sabbath. So if they died on the Sabbath, you had to leave them there and bury them on the day after the Sabbath. So they just put them in the tomb, probably put a rock there to keep wild animals out of it, and then they were going to come back and finish the burial, which was quite an extensive process depending on how you did it. And we'll see how they did it because John always gives more details. So that's why the ladies were there. They wanted to see where exactly his body was put so they could complete the burial Sunday morning. Now Luke has some other stuff to say. Now there was a man named Joseph from the Jewish town of Arimathea. He was a member of the council, a good and righteous man. So he's giving a character description. Who had not consented to their purpose and deed. Very clear, no part. And he was looking for the kingdom of God. This man went to Pilate and asked for the body of Jesus. Then he took it down and wrapped it in a linen shroud and laid him in a rock-hewn tomb where no one ever had yet been laid. Then the last gospel. After this, Joseph of Arimathea, who was a disciple of Jesus, but secretly for fear of the Jews, asked Pilate that he might take away the body of Jesus, and Pilate gave him leave. So he came and took away his body. Nicodemus also, who had at first come to him by night, came, bringing a mixture of myrrh and aloes, about 100 pounds weight. That's huge. One person I was reading said that he was killed as a criminal, but he was buried as a king. They took the body of Jesus and bound it in linen cloths. Notice we got a plural now. It's not just a linen cloth. It's linen cloths. So that should make us pique our interest, that little s. With the spices, as is the burial custom of the Jews. So I have some pictures of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. They say that that church is huge, and it encompasses both the exact spot where Jesus was crucified and the spot where he was buried. So this, what you have here, is the marble slab. That's where the body was prepared. That's not the tomb. And that's where they would have put the oil and spices and things on him. That's where they would have wrapped the linen shroud around him with other cloths. And then they would have put him into one of these, kind of like a shaft. The body just barely fits in there. It's a burial shaft, and they call it a kochim. And they are clearly from the time of Christ, and they are in that church. And the body would be laid there. But then what would happen? Well, after a while it would rot, and then the family would come, and they would gather the bones, put them into a bone box, and keep them in the family home in the basement. That's if you were wealthy. If you weren't wealthy enough to have that kind of home, well, then you had to do something else. You just left them there. But these shafts would be used over and over again. Not in the same month, of course, but over years. So, then something happened. This is the Sunday morning, and the ladies came to finish up. And Luke tells us, now it was Mary Magdalene and Joanna and Mary, the mother of James, and the other women with them who told this to the apostles. That is, the tomb was empty. But these words seemed to them an idle tale, and they did not believe them. Oh, those men. But Peter rose, just in case, and ran to the tomb. Stooping and looking in, he saw the linen cloths. See, now Luke even admits there's more than one. By themselves. And he went home wondering at what had happened. How would linen cloths in a tomb make him wonder about anything? Was he wondering if someone stole the body or what? We're not told, just that he was wondering. John tells us a little bit more. Now on the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene came to the tomb early, while it was still dark, and saw that the stone had been taken away from the tomb. So she ran and went to Simon Peter and the other disciple, the one whom Jesus loved, and said to them, they have taken the Lord out of the tomb, and we do not know where they have laid him. Isn't that logical? They put him there, he was dead. They come to finish the burial, and the body's gone. Somebody had to have taken him out. That is the normal way that we as human beings would have conjectured it, guessed it. So, Peter then came out with the other disciple, and they went toward the tomb. They both ran, but the other disciple outran Peter and reached the tomb first. And stooping to look in, he saw the linen cloths, plural, lying there, but he did not go in. Then Simon Peter came following him and went into the tomb. Notice the deference that the other disciples showed to Peter. Peter is the first in place. So John didn't even dare to go into the tomb until Peter had gone first. And then Simon Peter came following him and went into the tomb. He saw the linen cloths lying, so there's two there at least, and the napkin. So now we've got at least 3 cloths that we're talking about. So we've got the linen shroud, some other cloth that is not really mentioned specifically, and a napkin, whichever that would have been. But we know it had been on his head. Not lying with the linen cloths, but rolled up in a place by itself. Then the other disciple who reached the tomb first also went in, and he saw and believed. So John goes in after Peter. Remember, Luke said Peter left wondering. Now John isn't wondering. He saw and believed. But in the gospel, he's not exactly clear about what he believed. We guess that it's that Jesus rose from the dead. For as yet they did not know the scripture that he must rise from the dead. Then the disciples went back to their homes. So, would it have been this that John saw that made him believe? I used to think so, but then somebody who's smarter than me came up with another idea, and it really makes sense to me. So, and the idea was this. When they buried Jesus, they would have completely wrapped him up. Remember Lazarus? When Jesus brought Lazarus back to life, and that's not resurrection. Resurrection is different. Lazarus just came back to the same life he had before. And later on, Lazarus would have to die again. Lazarus' body is in the ground somewhere. Jesus' body is not in any tomb on this planet. He is resurrected. And I'll explain that a bit more. So, when Lazarus came out of the tomb, what did Jesus say? Unbind him. So in other words, he couldn't get out of his grave cloths. Somebody else had to do that for him. So how did Jesus get out of his grave cloths? Was there somebody there unwrapping it? And maybe not. Maybe, as this person here explains, maybe those linen cloths lay there empty, but still wrapped as they were around Jesus on Friday afternoon. Just empty. In other words, an impossible situation in ordinary circumstances. And there was no evidence of his body having been removed from the wrapped cloths. So when I get out of bed in the morning, my wife comes in, she sees the covers thrown back, because that's what I have to do. If I don't throw the covers back, I can't get out of bed. So I have to throw them back, and that's how I get out of bed. Lazarus had to be unwrapped before he could get out of the tomb. But in this case, perhaps everything is just the way it was for Jesus, and he just wasn't there. Now, if you look at the appearances of Jesus, that helps us understand that idea, because that's what he did after his resurrection. So when he came among the disciples, he just appeared in the middle of them. He didn't bang on the window and said, "Hey guys, I'm back," or on the door, "Let me in." He just appeared right there and must have shocked them right out of their socks, although they didn't wear socks then. So the locked doors, the windows, did not keep him out. And when he left, he didn't use the door. He just vanished. And perhaps that is how he got out of the cloths and left them there, and that would give Peter cause to wonder. And maybe that would also give cause for John to believe. Then, there is this. Okay, so we're just talking about the Gospels substantiating the fact that there is a burial cloth for Jesus. And now this little quote, I've read it often, and it's always been a puzzle to me. Paul says to the Galatians, You foolish Galatians, who has bewitched you? It was before your eyes that Jesus Christ was publicly exhibited as crucified. Now, none of those Galatians were in Jerusalem when Jesus was crucified. So how could he say that? It was before your eyes. So I checked the scripture commentaries to see what the really smart scripture scholars said. And they said something surprising. I did not believe what they said. They said Paul was so eloquent in his description of the crucifixion that it was as if it had happened before their eyes. But that's not how Paul talks. Paul is very clear and very straight in what he said. If it's before their eyes, it wasn't words that brought it. Something had to be there. Paul would have said, if it was what he said, he would have said, did I not speak to you of the crucifixion of Jesus, that he was publicly crucified? That's what he would have said, but he didn't. He says, before your eyes. But isn't this publicly before your eyes the crucifixion of Jesus? Is that not it? I'm sorry that this isn't as clear as it should be. So that's the other indication in Scripture that there was a shroud, a burial cloth of Jesus. And if he could publicly exhibit Jesus as crucified, there had to be an image. So the guess is that Paul and perhaps some of the other apostles and disciples used this cloth to bring new Gentiles to believe. They would not have shown it to the Jewish people, because being an object that has touched a dead person, it would have been considered very unclean. They would probably have taken it and destroyed it, and probably punished the people who touched it and who were playing with it. Now, oftentimes, when you read in the newspapers or in the radio about the shroud, you get something fantastic like this. I clipped this out of the Edmonton Journal in 1997 when I was still getting the journal. I don't anymore. And the big headline is, "Firefighter hailed for heroics." So this guy here is Mario Trematore, and he's a firefighter, but he wasn't on duty on that day. It's a Sunday. And he heard the fire engines, and he said, something just told me I had to be there. So he got his equipment, and he went to the scene of the fire, along with the other people there. And it's a good thing that he went, because he was the only one who was strong enough to use a sledgehammer to break the bulletproof glass behind which the shroud was stored. So that, to me, is a little miracle with God's guidance there. And so that's a huge happy story. They saved the shroud. Now, what I found on the same page that really bugs me is this. Shroud not genuine, say experts. So I read through that, and those experts, I really disagree with their conclusions. It's very faulty. But lots of people, they want to go around and convince you that the shroud isn't genuine, that it's all made up. And I'm not one to go around believing in things that are made up. So I've researched it. Now, the other big thing that you've heard was 9 years before this fire was these boys. Remember the carbon dating thing in 1988? I was hoping they wouldn't take any more pieces of the shroud and destroy it, because we do have a few pieces missing. This thing is down a little bit, but you see here, there's a little piece that's actually not there on the shroud anymore. That was cut away. We don't know exactly what happened to it. And this right here is also gone, and we don't know what happened to it. We suspect that perhaps the people who owned it cut off little pieces to give to their friends as souvenirs. And well, this is a little bit too hard, too down far. But it's in here that they took away a 3-inch strip and put it into 3 pieces, 1 by 1, 1 inch by 1 inch, and gave it to 3 carbon dating labs. So these guys really annoy me for a couple of reasons. Notice it's 1260 to 1390 with an exclamation mark. They were so happy. And look at that stance there. I just love that. Wait. They are so seekers of truth. So the 3 labs were involved in 3 different places: Zurich, Austria, Oxford in England, and Arizona in the US. And they all came back with a date range of 1260 to 1390, declaring the cloth only 600 or 700 years old, therefore impossible to be the same cloth in which Jesus was wrapped. And then the New York Times announced as well that same story: the shroud is a fake. End of story. And this is my favorite picture about those seekers of truth. Look at that. Look at that stance. The body language just tells you how they are humble seekers of truth. Now, what's wrong with this picture? I found a little book. Somebody was explaining all sorts of things about carbon dating that I did not know. So, first thing, these guys did not take a look at any other scientific evidence. 10 years exactly before this carbon dating, a team of scientists asked for permission to examine the shroud, and they were given 5 days. They took 2 years to prepare all the experiments that they were going to do, because they had so many in mind, and they had to work around the clock for those 5 days because that's all they were given, not more. And they did not check with these guys to see anything else that was relevant regarding the shroud. Next, they gave the impression that carbon dating is a very exact and extremely reliable scientific tool, which it isn't. And I'll show you some examples why. They also presented a conclusion that went beyond the facts given by their tool. The ultimate facts of a carbon dating is to say that there is so much radioactive carbon-14 in the sample. That's it. Now, to jump and say, therefore, the cloth is inauthentic, that's a leap. Because then you have to look at, well, why would there be more carbon-14 in this than there should be? And they would take a look at that. They didn't bother. They just took it as it was. They were also very unscientific in their approach. A real scientist would say, interesting. My test says this, but other tests seem to disagree. Let's talk it over and work it out to find out where the mistake is. They didn't want to, and they didn't bother. So here are some things I learned about carbon dating. So one of those 4 people that was involved in the carbon dating borrowed his mother's linen tablecloth. They knew it had been in the family for 350 years. When they dated it, it had been in the family only 50 years. When they dated it, it was 350 years old. How does that work? They didn't give the shroud a 300-year leeway either side, which they should have seen was important. They also took green leaves, currant, from a tree in Madrid, and those were dated to be a few hundred years old. Then, this is really funny. They found some South African rock paintings, and they put those to the test and dated them to be about 1,200 years old. They put pictures of the rocks in the South African newspaper, and when the teacher who did it saw that, she phoned them up and said, look, my art students and I were out in that area of South Africa 11 years ago, and we did some trial paintings on rock just for fun, and we left them there. How can you say they are 1,200 years old? If you give that leeway to the shroud, they're right on. But they don't. They also took a Viking horn from about 1000 AD, and it was dated at 2006. So when this was done, it would have been a couple years older than than the current date. Now, this is another interesting thing. A mummy's bones were dated to be 1,000 years older than its wrappings. Those would be linen wrappings. So the linen wrappings were newer than what the mummy was. So one person, to uphold the carbon dating thing, said, oh, they rewrapped the mummy after 1,000 years. Do you think that's plausible? I don't think so. Now, the other thing that some people knew about linen is that it is especially difficult to carbon date accurately. Willard Libby was the inventor of carbon dating, and he was against using this method to date the shroud because he considered the cloth to be too contaminated with various forms of carbon, making it impossible to get an accurate date. So the shroud was probably put on an altar a long time ago. Remember our antimines, which is the burial of Jesus? And I'm thinking that the shroud was kind of the inspiration for doing other cloths like that. Of course, they have to make them by hand, draw them, so that every altar would have one. But they saw how really symbolic and important it was to have this on the altar on which you would pronounce the words of consecration on the bread and the wine. The connection is that from here, Jesus rose from the dead. Whatever we eat has to be dead, right? So in the Eastern churches, we have a side table where the bread and the wine are prepared. After the homily, there is a procession of those gifts, and it goes around to the front of the church, in front of the altar, outside of the altar area. So it'd be kind of coming into here and around, and then they're processed. That's kind of like a procession, a funeral procession. The bread and the wine is dead. So the bread and wine is put on the altar. Remember that slab on which Jesus was put? Remember the kochim in which his body was put? And on the third day he rose again. So that's why altars have to be of marble. It goes back to that connection with the burial of Jesus. And so then the shroud kind of reminds you, this is Jesus' dead body. The bread and wine are not living. And once the words of consecration are said, that bread and that wine is no longer dead. It is the living, resurrected body of Christ. Do you see the symbolism? Isn't that amazing? So, back to our carbon dating thing. This is a drawing from an exposition of the shroud in 1579. Notice how it's being held up. They don't have stands with a pole on which the cloth is hanging. People are holding it. There's a bishop there, or two, and there are a number of priests. And if you look on the right-hand side, that side, they're grabbing it right here. What do you have in your hands on a hot day? Sweat. You also have oils. So if those go on there, and they've been going on since those kind of expositions from about 13-something onwards, that would really contaminate the entire top, more so than anything else. If, as I am right and others suggested, the shroud was on altars, they would burn candles. So the soot from the candles would also kind of like penetrate and be on it as well. So that's what Willard Libby was talking about. It isn't worth it. Now, the owners of the family, one of the family members who were owners of the shroud, which is the House of Savoy, His Royal Highness Prince Vittorio Emanuele di Savoia. He wrote a book, and he said in his preface to that book, The Untold Story of the Holy Shroud, he says, "It is evident that the Holy Shroud has been targeted by militant atheism in a public campaign launched in the secular media to discredit the resurrection of Jesus of Nazareth as the Savior and the Christ." And I see that all the time. And it is not right. So we have to put up a little bit of pushback to this. We can't just roll over and say, yeah, whatever you say is good. No, it's not good. It's not true. It's wrong. Now, obviously, His Royal Highness believes in the authenticity of the shroud. These are some of the caskets in which the shroud has been stored, rolled up, folded up, etc. And you kind of saw what happened to my own copy of the shroud. When you roll it up, you get lots of folds and things like that. It's not a good thing. So each of these things are decorated with silver, with jewels. People don't do that for they don't treat it that respectfully. And the other one, that's where it was rolled up in. In the left one, that's where they folded it. So you're going to have the folds on the original. You'll be able to see those kind of folds. So it's no longer stored that way. It is put into a huge, well, it kind of looks like this. It's a big box. There, you see on the right-hand side. Now, this isn't the same thing. This is old, so that's from 1931, and that's how it was displayed, just to protect it, and so people can't go up and touch it and things like that. And but nowadays they have a space-age container like that. It's a special kind of glass that they put over top of it. It is airtight, and they've taken out all of the oxygen, and they've put in nitrogen, I believe it is, or argon, I forget which one is the better one. And so that the natural oxidation doesn't continue, because what they were noticing is that the non-image part, what should have been white, is turning brown. And if they let that keep happening, eventually the brown of the aging is going to catch up with the darker colors of the image, and you won't be able to detect the image anymore. So that's the way it looked in 1931. Here's the way it looked in 1978, and that was the year they did the testing, the scientific tests. This is the Church of St. John the Baptist. That's the home church, I guess, personal church of the royalty. And those people were snaked in a line. They tell me that the line went down the street for another half a mile. So here is the shroud displayed in the middle of Mass. And there's a little van on the right-hand side. Do you recognize that, any of you? Older folks. That's the Pope Mobile, yeah. And the Pope introduces and makes a little speech before he goes in to venerate the shroud. This is not a hotel. This is the personal home of the Savoy family. Yeah, wouldn't you want one of those, eh? Complete with servants, enough money to keep it up. And behind them is a garden. And what they did in later years, I'll show you in a minute. I'm getting ahead of myself, sorry. So there's the Pope going in with a number of bishops, cardinals, and priests. And isn't that a beautiful church? Yeah, and you can see how huge it is. I was there in 2000 with my wife and daughter. And here's Pope John Paul praying before the shroud. This is Pope Francis praying before the shroud. And this is what they did in the garden behind that nice house. They put up a little walkway. And as you went along the walkway, they would have pictures with words explaining different things about the shroud. Sometimes on the right or left, they'd have a little TV that just played the same little clip over and over. So it's not in the sun like it was in 1978. It's a pleasant walk and you're learning things. So by the time we got to see the shroud, we had learned a bit more about it. You didn't get very close to it though. I think the closest we've got is from the camera to here. And they had what do they call those guys with the guns? They got two types of police. Carabinieri, that's it. The Carabinieri, they were the guys with the guns. So that's who was there, so that nobody could come up, rush it and wreck it or anything else like that. Now, to wonder why the shroud looks like this. So I don't know if you can see it very well. The top of the head is here, and the back of the head, the shoulders. You could have seen some of the arms, but there was a fire in 1531 that put holes in it. And then you see the back of the legs goes down here, and the bottom of the feet are here. And on this side you've got, see where, here we are. So this is the top of the head, and these marks here, that's blood stains from the crown of thorns. It really bled. This is the face. This is the area on the shroud with the darkest image. And then it comes down to the chest, and here's the place where the spear went in, and you can see the drips from the nail wounds in the wrists, actually, and along both sides, and then there's the front of the legs is there. Now, so this picture here kind of explains how this image got to be this way. It would have been laid down in the bottom, and this part would have been laid over top of him. That's where the front got to be. Now, no scientist was interested in studying the shroud until the 1890s, when they came up with some new technology. It was photography. And what you had there is a huge box, and you can put one plate in it. It's a glass plate with photosensitive chemicals on it. The knob here is what you turned open, you screwed it open, and there was a lens behind that, and you had to hold, like when people took pictures in those days, you had to stand still for 5 minutes. And if you moved, your picture, your image was a blur. You couldn't tell who you were, because it was very slow acting, those chemicals. And this is a modern camera that we're more used to, that you can see the difference. So this man was a lawyer, and somehow he got permission to take a picture of the shroud, which is amazing in itself, but he did. So this is what he uses his camera at. He waits 5-10 minutes, whatever it was, for that first piece of technology used for photography, and then he closes up the lens. You can't let any more light touch it, or it's going to wreck your picture. So he takes his big box camera back to his place. He has to take the plate out in a dark room, because again, any more light on that, he wipes out the picture. So you can use infrared light. That's okay, that won't affect it. And then you put it into fixative water. It's a tank. You just put it in there, and you kind of scrape it off, and then it takes the active part of the chemical out, so that what's been reacting to the light stays that way, and you get a picture. Well, after a few minutes, this is what peered up at him through the developing fluid. Did he get a shock? He could not believe it. So, but what did you notice something about that picture compared to this one?
This is the negative.
This one's clearer, isn't it?
Yeah, the negative.
Yeah. So this one is a negative. See, when you compare the two, like that looks more like a positive, doesn't it? And yet, what's on here is the original. So how did a negative get onto here? And then when you take a negative of a negative, oops, sorry. This is the negative, you take a negative of a negative, you get a positive. Now you can tell, how did that work? So that's the big thing, that people who say it's fake, they can't explain that. Like one person said, oh, it's Leonardo da Vinci, he's always experimenting with new things, he even did a camera obscura, etc., etc. And like it doesn't work. Besides, Leonardo da Vinci lived about 150 years after the first documented showing of the shroud in Europe. So I'm sorry, that doesn't cut it. Something else is behind that. Anyways, when he showed that picture, people were upset with him. They accused him of touching up the photograph. His reputation was ruined. And instead of being a rich lawyer, he died a poor man. However, his photograph sparked renewed interest in the shroud. That's when scientists said, there's more here than meets the eye, literally. And they wanted to start seeing it. In 1931, Giuseppe Enri, who was a professional photographer, took another picture of the shroud and got exactly the same result. So at least a little bit before he was died, Secondo was vindicated. But he still died a poor man. So people have been wanting to examine it, scientists. And finally, in 1978, A group of scientists from the United States received permission to do so. They called themselves STURP, Shroud of Turin, T-U-R is Turin, Research Project. And they were under oath to not damage it and not to alter it in any way. And they gave their word and they kept it. So you can see them here. They had to make a special table so they could rotate it any which way that they wanted to. They knew that they were examining an image, so they did tests as if it were an artwork. So they wanted to find out what was the process of image formation. Was it paint? Was it dye? Was it whatever it was? They wanted to look at that, and they had regular cameras, ultraviolet cameras, and everything you can imagine. They were very well prepared, and they discovered a lot of things. Notice they're also wearing white gloves. That's so no hand contamination. So what did they discover? They discovered that it is a 14-foot by 3-foot quality linen, exactly the same size as this, because this is a copy. In fact, this is a copy of one of the plates that the original photographer, Barry Schwartz, took of the shroud in 1978. And if you want to have your own life-size copy of the shroud for your living room wall, you can do that. It's a little expensive, but you can if you want. These uprights here I got from him as well. Also a little pricey, but it really shows things up. Now, it says quality linen. What was the thing that came up in all 4 Gospels that we read? Jesus was buried in a clean linen shroud, in something expensive. So anyone who owned the shroud always treated it as authentic. None of them ever went around saying that it wasn't. So how did that happen? Of course, it's the way the shroud was folded. So these things here make it a little hard to see. But this would have been folded in half here. You can see kind of a heavy fold right down the middle. So this top would have been over here like this. And then it would have been folded over one more time. So from here to here, that goes 16 to 8. When you go from this half to here, that's 8 to 4. And then it would have been folded from this end to that end, so the 4 becomes 2. And then they would have folded it again from that half to there, and that becomes one hole. So the biggest hole is the one, I think it was this one right here, that was on top. And the smallest hole, which would have been one of these here, or there, was on the bottom. So that's how 1 drop of silver did that. And they also say there are watermarks. So they're kind of like diamond spots. Here's the one in the middle. There's one there. There's one here. There's a huge one here. And they're the same on the other side here. So some say that that was putting out the fire. That water isn't anywhere near the holes. So no, that wasn't the reason. And somebody else suggested that perhaps in part of its history, it was stored in a clay jar, folded, so that, and in the clay jar, they breathe. So if it's moist, the moisture can gather inside the jar and put those stains on there. And that makes about the most sense to me. So there's the body image. I have 3 question marks there because we still don't really know how that image got on there. There are microscopic elements of pollens and wood splinters, soil and threads, and those are important. And these are things that I wish the carbon dating committee had really looked at seriously and taken into account, but they did not, because the pollens tell a huge story. So wood splinters, this is the front, this is the back. Where do you think the wood splinters were found? Just anywhere? No, they were found along the shoulder area. And would they have been from trees from Europe? No, they were from trees in Jerusalem. Oak, Jerusalem oak is what they used, and evidently that was a favorite tree, good and strong. And it was heavy. Then there were soil. So the soil was found mostly on the feet and right up to the knees. The soil there is very, well, it would have been dusty, so it would have been kicked up a bit. So all along here is soil. My brother was a soil analyst. He worked for Alberta Agriculture, and his job was to take soil samples in different farms, send it to the lab, and the lab would say, okay, the composition of your soil is best for wheat, for barley, for cucumbers, whatever it was. And they could also tell you which part of Alberta the soil came from. Because all the soil, it's different. It's completely and uniquely different. So this soil here, did it come from any place in Europe? No. There's only one place where you get this kind of soil, and that is Jerusalem. Even 10 miles away from Jerusalem, the soil is different. This is the exact same combination. Where else did they find soil? On the knees. So how does soil get on knees? When you fall. And they also discovered soil on the nose. Again, part of those 3 falls. And that's when Simon was called in. That must have hurt. But it's there. And those are things that you can't fake. The threads that they discovered were threads from different cloth that they used to mend the shroud after the fire. Because if you recall, they were holding this up, and if they left these holes here, it's good linen, it's heavy, it's thick. The weight of it would have made the holes bigger, and so they had to patch it, and they also put a cloth on the back to also help take some of the weight off the actual shroud when they were displaying it by hand. So that's where the threads came from. So here again is just another clear picture of where the holes are from that 1532 fire. That's the front, that's the back, and I explained those to you. You also see something very interesting. These holes here. We have no idea how they got there. Some people are suggesting that when it was used on the altars, there would be candles there, or maybe incense fell. That's all possible. Our rugs in our church do have charcoal marks from somebody who was a little enthusiastic in doing the incensing. Seriously. So, those are still mysterious. Now, the interesting thing about this, and this is where those carbon daters would have benefited from checking out a little bit of history. Those same things are in a drawing from a 12th century Hungarian manuscript. They call it a Prey manuscript because of the guy's name who discovered it. Hrihori Prey, or Pry probably is what they would have said. And we've dated it accurately to 1192 to 1195. So that is earlier than what the carbon dating gives credit for. And in there that shows a picture of the burial of Jesus, and it shows those same L-shaped holes. Also are the unusual herringbone weave of the cloth. That was very expensive cloth that was woven that way at that time. So here it is. Again, Jesus is buried. You can see this right here is the herringbone weave, and there you've got the cloth, those L-shaped holes, and they're down there somewhere. I can't see them over my shroud. Make sense? So that tells you carbon dating, very questionable. Now, the other thing that they did in order to discover what kind of material was used to put on the image, if they had used paint, paint when it dries becomes opaque, in fact even before it dries. So they put the light behind all parts of the shroud to find if there was any paint. The only place where they found something similar to paint was on the head, the forehead. There's a backwards 3 on the forehead. It's right here. And that isn't paint, it's blood. Real human blood. See, lots of people, before all of this was set out scientifically and proven, they thought, oh, somebody used animal blood, they faked it, they did this and that and other thing like that. One guy still insists that this whole image is done by iron oxide. There isn't any iron oxide in the degree on this cloth. So, I also mentioned to you that the face area here is where the darkest part of the image is. As soon as they put that light there, the image completely disappeared. All you see is the blood. That's it. Which tells you that the image cannot be any kind of paint. In fact, if you look at 6 times magnified area of the nose, which is the darkest spot, you can hardly see that there's anything there. And the reason for that is that the image seems to be just on the topmost fibril of the cloth, not thread. The thread is made up of several hundreds of those fibrils. Fibrils is that smallest part that you can see, each of these. And it's just the very top 1/5 or 1/10 of it that is, it looks like it's advanced aged, like oxidation, just kind of a browning on there. And there's no way that we have any technology that can just get it that far. And in areas where it's darker, there isn't more of that. More threads are darkened, but it doesn't go darker and deeper into the threads or into the fibrils. Here's where it's darker, you get more of them, but it's all shallow, very shallow. One fellow said you can take a razor and that would be too coarse to take off the image that is on here. So let's take a look at this one, that's even closer. And you can't see any kind of paint, pigment, or anything like that. Now, if you look at the blood, different story. Can you see the blood that's on there? If there were paint, you would have seen it like that. So there is no paint, but there is blood. Now here is a, what is that, a 400 times magnification of a fibril. This right here is what gives you the image. That's it. We can't do that. And to have such a precise image, and I mean precise, and we'll get into that a bit more. Here is one of the fibers that doesn't have any image on it. So you can see there's no dents in it and things like that. Then, on the chest, we're out of power. Anyhow, one of the cameras was an ultraviolet camera. And when blood comes out, especially in larger amounts, it separates before it dries. And you get the main red part of the blood on the inside, and around the outside you get serum that dries. The unique thing about human serum is that it glows in ultraviolet light. So one of the tests they did to see if it was real blood, they took a picture with an ultraviolet camera. I don't have any of those pictures to show you, so what they did, I guess they didn't have any either, is they just did a drawing. So this is fluorescing blood, which tells you it is real blood. These little dark marks here, guess what that's from? The scourge. There are 120 of these marks on his body. That would have hurt. In fact, one of the coroners who examined the negatives, these right here actually, he had these, he said, after having been scourged like that, there's no guarantee that even in a modern emergency room, he would have been able to be saved from death. Because the shock to the organs from that extreme pain is unbelievable. Then there's also the wound, sorry, getting ahead of myself. Okay, blood, he's upright on the cross when he gets stabbed with the lance. So the blood comes out and goes down. So what's left up here is the entry point of the spear. So you can actually measure how wide the spear was. Now in the 1300s, when they say this thing was faked, they didn't have Roman spears laying around. They were buried in battlegrounds, in rubbles and things like that. When we started archaeology, that's when we started to come up with a lot of these ancient implements of destruction. And this width here matches exactly a Roman spear. Could that have been faked? I wish those carbon daters would have checked that out. So it's exactly the size, and it's exactly in the position as recounted in the gospel. So here is a rusty old lance. That's a good thing. It means it hasn't been used. And it fits precisely. And the hands, likewise. Here's the blood there. Man, that really washes it out. We should have had this at night, eh? It'd be, but here is where it is. Now, the thing about Jesus on this shroud, he was so dehydrated. The linen is quite thick and heavy that the only place that the blood went through to the backside was over an open wound. So when they looked in the back of the wound on the hand, they didn't see that all that blood there. All they saw on the backside was a square, 1 centimeter by 1 centimeter, which fit exactly the Roman nails that they used for crucifixion. How can you fake that? Like, that it comes through as a square. It's just, again, it boggles my mind how some people think. Now, there is a problem though. In all art, the wounds from the hands are shown in the palm. But the shroud shows definitely that it comes in the wrist. So how do you reconcile both of those two things? Dr. Zugib is a pathologist. He's a coroner in New York. He's written the book for all the students on exactly what leads to what signs to look for that tell you how a person died. He's the man. So he says the shroud shows the nail wound in the wrist on the back of the hand, and stigmatists and traditional art shows the nail in the palm of the hand. Now there is a location in the hand that would satisfy both of these facts, as well as having the strength to support the full weight of the body. Because if you just put it straight through the palm and it comes out in the back of the palm, the ligament here is very weak. It wouldn't have held the weight of the body, it'd just fall off. But those Romans, they were smart. They knew how to do it. So Dr. Zugib shows this. No person was hurt in the making of this picture. This person actually went through willingly acupuncture. I would never do that. But anyway, he shows how it would come through the palm and come out the wrist. That would hold the body on the cross. And you get the wound in the palm in the front and in the wrist in the back. So that sounds good. Now on the back, it's a little bit different. The feet, not the back, the feet. So you see here a little drawing? That's a triangle. I'm sorry that you can't see it any better than that. But if you come up here onto my back image on this side here, it's very clear. And we'll have to break. When we break, I hope you'll all be able to come up and take a look at things and see them a little bit more carefully. So, the wound on the foot is triangular, and they think that was made by a longer, stronger nail that went through both feet and could support the entire weight of the body. So there you can see it a little bit better. Right inside there is a very clean, absolutely total triangle. And that's the thickest, the darkest part. So it comes on the negative as the lightest part. Then you've got the scourging on the back. As I said, 120 of these marks. And when they take one of the old whips, this is kind of put together. They found the dumbbells somewhere. And those are Roman dumbbells that they actually used in scourgings. And they fit perfectly on the marks on the shroud. Could somebody in the 1300s have done that? No, they didn't have the whips. Archaeology is an amazing thing. I also said 120. The Jewish law, however, said that all they could get was 40 lashes less 1. So how does that figure out? Well, here's the way one flagrum looked. There are 3 strands. So if you go 120 divided by 3, you get about 40. So they did follow that law. And you can see a close-up of one of the scourge marks. The idea of the scourging was not to break the skin. It was to cause a blood blister underneath. And those are extremely painful. That's what they wanted to do. But it seems that the boys were a little enthusiastic, and they did break through in quite a few areas, and it bled as well. So that's what you have. Now, I'm going to connect this to something else I was talking about earlier. The blood type on the shroud is AB. It's a very rare, well, it's a Jewish blood type. It's rare, very rare, in any other population. And Eucharistic miracles always show blood type A, B. I don't know if you're familiar with any Eucharistic miracles. If not, you've got to Google it. There are a few really good videos. When I discovered that Eucharistic miracles blood type was always AB, I said, wow, that sure connects with the shroud, doesn't it? So here's one. And in Buenos Aires, Argentina, which was the see of Archbishop Jorge Bergoglio, you may recognize the name. He is now Pope Francis, but he was there. And he was the one who oversaw this whole thing. So, and the person speaking here is Dr. Gomez from Argentina. And they sent this sample from the Eucharist. I should tell you a little bit more. What they did, they found a host in a planter at the back of the church. It had obviously been desecrated by someone. And when the priest came, because it was one of the other parishioners that discovered it, he couldn't consume it. It was that bad a shape. So the protocol is to take it, to put it into a glass of water, and to let it completely dissolve, and to pour it into the soil somewhere and dispose of it that way. Well, they left it for a few weeks, and it was supposed to completely dissolve. It didn't. It turned red. There's no red color in a host. And then what he also noticed, so he just left it there longer. He came back later, and now it looked like there was muscle tissue there. And so Archbishop Bergoglio had it sent to the best man to analyze this kind of thing, and they didn't tell him it was a host. So Dr. Gomez says, we gave Dr. Zugib the sample, and he said the person who had this heart must have been very wounded, because in his heart shows that he must have been very beat up. He was tortured. Well, obviously he was, wasn't he? And he didn't know this was a host. Then what happened is that he said, but there is something you need to explain. How is it possible that while I was studying this sample, the sample was moving? It was beating. So you explain to me, how did you take out the heart of a dead man and took it to me alive to me in my New York lab? And they told him, Professor Zugib, this is not what you think. This is a consecrated host that started bleeding. Imagine, says Dr. Gomez, he's hairier than me, and he almost pulled out his hairs. Now, if you want to read the full story in a little bit better English, the Magis Center has the whole thing up there. I won't do that now. But it just blows my mind. It totally blows my mind. So if this is alive, it makes me think of what Jesus said in his Bread of Life discourse. I am the bread of life. He who eats my flesh and drinks my blood will live forever. I am the living bread that came down from heaven. See, the real miracle is that when the priest says those words of consecration, that bread and wine become the body and blood of Jesus. That's the real miracle, but we don't see that. So Jesus is giving us a little extra to help us along with our faith. So when this miracle happens, we see literally what is there spiritually. That's such a great grace. Now, back to the shroud. Jesus, you can see, bled a lot on here. And they think that it wasn't a circlet like the West imagines, like that's kind of the royal crowns in the back. And one of the guys from the East said, that's because the West isn't as rich as the East. They didn't have enough gold to make a real gold crown go over the whole head. Well, they had enough thorns in Jerusalem to make a cap of thorns too. And those could have been made by Ziziphus spinae Christi. And there are a couple other very spiny plants that also could have been used to torture Jesus. We'll talk a bit more about those. Now, if this had been faked, The artist would have had to have laid this sheet on a huge table in two-dimensional space, flat. He would have had to have been so good that everything, every mark that he put on here would actually have fit on a real body exactly in that place when it was wrapped around the body. Does that make sense? How do you do that? Like, that has got to be amazing skill. Or maybe a photograph. So another thing that they discovered on the shroud is a headcloth and phylactery. So they think that, let's see if you can see that. Okay, can you all see? I know some of you are quite far back. I'm sorry about that. But right here between the hair here, there's a dark space. It's empty. And on the other side as well. So they think that there's a cloth like this would have been there that would have caused that. And then there is also something else. You notice that they've got something on the forehead there? Okay, they think that's a phylactery. Now, a phylactery is a leather pouch. It has to be leather. And in it, the person who wears it takes one of the laws of God, the most important one generally, and puts it in there. And that's to fulfill another commandment of Moses, which was, you must keep the law of the Lord before you always. In your going and in your coming, in the morning and in the night, you must keep the law of the Lord before you. What better way to do that than to have a pouch with that most important law always there? So good Jews would wear that. And Jesus would mention that. He'd say, listen to the Pharisees. Do what they do. They are teachers on the seat of Moses. But do not do what they do. For they like to wear robes with long tassels. They like to be greeted politely and respectfully in public, in the temple areas. And they like to wear extra large phylacteries. That is in the gospel, honest. Here's an extra large phylactery. But it is leather. And inside there is this. So I'm thinking, and in some of the other passages, one of the Pharisees would say to Jesus, Master, what do you think is the most important law? And Jesus would say, to love the Lord your God with your whole heart, soul, strength, and mind, and your neighbor as yourself. And in Luke, the next question of the Pharisee was to ask, well, who is my neighbor? And that's when Jesus would tell the story of the Good Samaritan. Other times, though, Jesus would ask the Pharisee, so, Simon, what do you think is the most important law? And Simon would answer, to love the Lord your God with your whole heart, soul, and strength. And then Jesus would say, you are not far from the kingdom, Simon. So that's an important little thing. Now, where did they get the idea of a phylactery? Again, you can hardly see this, but let me point it out to you. There's a little triangle there. You see that? That's not a facial feature. Above that triangle is a square or a little rectangle. And from each side of the rectangle is something that looks like a string. That's what they saw there, and that's what they were putting onto the man to kind of fit it all together and see if that was what it was. And the triangle, I'm guessing, is when the Roman soldiers wanted to abuse and insult Jesus. They would have ripped it open, perhaps, and just to desecrate the law, because they had no respect for Jewish laws and regulations. So these shapes as well can be seen on many icons of Jesus. They are not facial features. So next, this is Dr. Robert Buckley. He is the one who did kind of an autopsy on the man in the shroud using these two black and white ones, the negatives, which are actually a positive. And he said, the markings on this image are so clear and so medically accurate, the pathological facts would say the suffering and death of the man depicted here are beyond dispute. So on the basis of that full-size photographic negative, he was able to do a forensic analysis of the nature of the wounds and cause of death. Now, one of the other things that he pointed out was that he said the picture, the image here, depicts medical knowledge beyond what they knew in 1300, 1500, 16, and 1900. You see these wounds here? We have two types of blood vessels in our body. We have arteries and we have veins. Arteries come directly from the heart. The blood is under pressure. When you puncture an artery, it really bleeds. Veins bring the blood back to the heart. When you hit one of those, blood comes out, but it's not a huge torrent. And the doctor says that every one of these marks here corresponds exactly to whether it was a vein or an artery that was pierced. I wish the carbon daters would have checked with them to find out that little piece of information. Now, so it's medically accurate beyond what they knew. So it just cannot be a fake. But what he surprised me with most was this statement. He said that the man's expression on this cloth is one of complete peace. Now, I've looked at this many, many times. I'm not really good at reading those kind of expressions, but I thought that, well, yeah, he's dead. So, of course, he'd be in peace. I've seen lots of movies where the hero gets killed and his wife and friends or whatever are around there, and while he's in the struggle with the enemy or whoever, you've got the strenuousness of his struggles on his face. But as soon as he gets killed, all that disappears and he relaxes and dies. That's what I thought. But he says that in all of his many years of doing autopsies on the bodies of victims of traumatic death, all of them had the pain of their last moments etched on their faces. I shared this with one group at St. Joseph's Cathedral, and somebody in the audience said, "I get that. I'm an undertaker, and we hate doing suicides because there is nothing you can do to make them look happy." So I thought, how could Jesus have that look of peace? How could Jesus look that way? So I think there are three things. His real struggle wasn't on the cross. He had a struggle before he went to the cross. That's why we call this the agony in the garden. That's right. And it was there that he had that huge fight. It was there that just thinking about what was going to happen, he sweated blood. And yes, it is medically possible to sweat blood under extreme duress. And he prayed to his Father, and he asked for that cup to be removed. And he did not sleep, but his disciples slept. 3 times he came over to the 3 that he had invited to join him to give him support. They fell asleep. I understand that, and I'm sure you do too. There are times in a person's life when the next day you're going to meet your mini Armageddon and you are not looking forward to it. When one of those days comes, I do not sleep. I maybe get an hour or 2 when I'm supposed to get up. That's when I start to fall asleep, but I'm struggling with the whole thing the whole night through. Jesus did not sleep that night at all. So, but once he accepted it, and the gospel just gives it a couple short lines, it's amazing how quickly it goes through. But you have to think about it to really understand what was happening in that garden. So when he said finally, "Father, not my will, but your will be done," that's when he accepted what he had to do completely. Now, we are human beings with divided hearts. And that makes it makes it difficult for us to completely accept something difficult. We decide to do it, but somehow not all of us is in the game. But Jesus was. So once he accepted that, it was done. He said, "It's over." And he came over, woke them up for the last time, and he said, "Behold, my betrayer is at hand." And he went, and he had peace already. Now there's another reason why he has peace. This is in death, instead of that agony that he should have had if he were a regular person in Dr. Buckley's mortuary. As they were punching the nails in his hands, as they were abusing him, he was on the cross for about 6 hours, from about 9 o'clock to 3 o'clock. 3 o'clock he died. And they came by, passers-by, to insult him. And what did he do while they were doing this? He said, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." Just think how hard that is. When some people say something that insults us, it really hurts. Now forgive them without them coming up and saying, "Oh, gee, I'm really sorry." He forgave without any one of them coming to him and saying, "I'm sorry." They didn't. As far as we know, none of them asked for forgiveness. None of them even recognized they were doing something wrong. But he forgave them anyway. And I think that's the second thing that gives him peace. And again, when he forgives, it's totally, completely forgiven. We've all been hurt. And I know that when I've been hurt a lot, I try to forgive because I want to be tight with Jesus. And I think I have forgiven that person. A few weeks later, I see that person again, and all the old feelings rush back up again. And I have to go through that whole process again of forgiving. But we got to do that. And that gives us peace. Even just trying gives us peace. But for Jesus, it's total forgiveness. And even on the cross, there were the two thieves. The one thief who reviled him, saying, "Why don't you take us all down?" He was very selfish. He didn't care what Jesus felt like or anybody else. He wanted out of his predicament. But the other man, he was also a thief. He also sinned. And he said, "Do you not know that this man is innocent, whereas we have deserved what we get?" And then he turned to Jesus and said, "Remember me when you come into your kingdom." And Jesus said, "This very day, I tell you, you will be with me in paradise." So what did that thief do? He sinned, same as the other guy. But what was the difference? He accepted his punishment. He didn't rail against it. He said, "This is just." And he just turned to Jesus and asked for mercy, and Jesus gave it to him. And that's the same thing with us. When we accept our punishment, our suffering every day, then Jesus can help us out too and bring us into paradise with him as well. So, first, acceptance of God's will, no matter how difficult it is. Complete acceptance. Second, forgiveness. Forgiveness of all the harms that have been done to us, and accepting whatever punishment, just or not, we get. Because his punishment was certainly the most unjust of punishments. If he can forgive that, we too can forgive. Then the last thing, he did this out of love. He on purpose accepted that death. He didn't have to. He could have run away. His disciples in Bethany, after he raised Lazarus, told him to stay away. They're going to kill you. Yeah, he knew that. But he said, "This is what I have come for." Now, as parents, you know that because you love your children, you would sacrifice a lot for them. In fact, because of your love, you probably don't even count some of those sacrifices as real sacrifices. Just what you got to do to show love to your children so that they have something good or whatever it is. So that love makes up. It lets you accept a lot of things. And that's what Jesus had. In the East, we have a title for Jesus. We call him Lover of Mankind in our liturgies a number of times. Now, in the West, we know that Jesus loved us, but we don't give him that title. I wish we did. So next, let's go back to another part of the shroud. This is Max Frye, Detective Max Frye. He worked for Interpol. He was one of their top detectives, And he was able to solve many crimes because of pollens. He had a whole collection of them, and he knew what pollens were from which plant. And he solved a couple of cases that way because the guy would say, no, I was never there. I did not drag that body underneath the mulberry bush. And then Detective Frye would say, I would like to see the pants that you had on that particular day. And he would find pollen grains from the mulberry bush. So those pollen grains meant that he was there. So that's how he got a few people. Of course, there's other evidence too. So he took a look at all the different pollens that were on the shroud. So we had Gundelia tuniforti, as well as that other one, Sisyphus Christi spine, or whatever it was that you call it. And guess where those sharp, spiny pollens were mostly on the shroud? If you guessed the head, you're right, because that's where the crown was. So those pollens are mostly around here. Now you tell those carbon daters, would somebody in 1300 have faked that, gone to the Middle East and figured out which plant was put on Jesus' head? Not a chance. You can't fake that kind of information. So pollens, just like with those accused people, they are a clue as to where the shroud has been. So most of the pollens are from Jerusalem. Some are from Turkey, today's Turkey, which would have been then Greece. And some are from Europe. If this was faked in Europe, you wouldn't have had any from Turkey or Jerusalem. They would all have been from Europe. That is not the case. So this is where those scientists who were doing the carbon dating failed to do their job adequately. And they think this is probably the trip that it took. So it would have started in Jerusalem, gone to Edessa, and I'll explain why we think Edessa. It's an important stopover. From there, it would have gone to Constantinople, and then they think it would have gone by boat around here and up to France to a small little town called Liri. And from there to Chambéry, where the fire was, and put these holes into it. And then to Torino, which is Turin, where it still is today. So, let's take a look at some more information. So, sure. Yep, this is a good time to take a break.
So friends, we'll have a little break, so please come to the hall. We have some little cookies for you and something to drink. So please, everyone, you can come to the hall, but make sure that you keep the distance. Okay? And if you want to use the restroom, feel free to use the restroom in the hall too, and we will sanitize them later.
Areas. See if you can find some flowers on the shroud. And you're certainly welcome to come and take a look at all of this as well. Robert.
Ah, che Brian che Lazarus.
Sinasabi lang yung isa. Ay, mo ako yun na. May nag-iisip namin pangalan. Necessity applies.
After that nice break, we have to thank the cooks. Always thank the cooks. Thank you. That was a nice little break, and I got to do something with his microphone because it doesn't like my tie. So, you see the picture over there? That man is an Israeli botanist named Avinoam Danin. He's not Catholic, by the way. He's not Christian. He's 100% Israeli. And he studied the imageless areas of the shroud. I should have done this last slide with you before the break, because then I would have had you look on these 5 displays to see if you could find flower shapes on them. One of my students found it before I could. That was embarrassing, but that's okay. I'm glad he did. And these flowers that he identified are unique to Israel, and they are found only around the area around Jerusalem. Now those carbon daters didn't care. Too bad. The reality is the reality. So he drew in where the different flowers were that he saw, and you can see them there, kind of, it's a little fuzzy. And then, so he drew them on the left, and on the right-hand side, he actually took flowers of that type and put them there. And I'm not going to try to pronounce most of those things. Some of them I'll have to pronounce. So, there are 4 plant species, the images of which are found on the shroud, and that indicates the geographical origin of the shroud. fresh stems of the plants Cundelia tourneforti, which could have been part of the crown of thorns. The Zygophyllum dumosum, oh man, it's getting bad. Cistus creticus, Caparis aegyptia could be replaced on the dead man's body only in a strip of land a few kilometers wide between Jerusalem and Hebron. Fake that, carbon daters. So, he also found 9 blooming species on good photographs of the shroud. Not all photographs of the shroud show the same thing. And now these flowers bloom between the months of March and April, and Jesus would have been crucified on the day before Passover. Passover is calculated the same way as our Easter. Our Easter occurs as the first Sunday after the first full moon after the spring equinox. Got it? So you have to have the equinox. Then you have to have a full moon, and then you have to have the Sunday. So they did it with the Passover. So we can calculate exactly which day that would have happened. It would have been in around March or April in any case. So that's the only time that those flowers bloom. Would you find them in the 1300s in Europe? No, they wouldn't. So the man in the shroud was possibly tortured with those different thorn types because it's a desert area, so you get lots of thorny plants. And let's take a look at some other ancient traditions, Orthodox icons, and interesting historical details. So you'll notice that on that map, the first point of departure after Jerusalem, the shroud was deemed to be in Edessa. And this is the reason why. Because there's an ancient story that goes back that the king of Edessa, King Abgar, had leprosy. And he had heard that there was a man named Jesus in Israel who was able to heal people. And so he sent 2 of his servants to Israel to ask Jesus to come to Edessa and heal him. By the time his servants got there, Jesus had been crucified. But 2 of the disciples said, "Don't worry, we will come and you can take a look at the face of Jesus and you will be cured." And you see in the icon, there's a cloth. And what's on the cloth? The face of Jesus. That cloth was brought to Abgar. He looked on it, and sure enough, he was cured. And we have in other historical documents what he did next. He made his entire kingdom Christian, just like that. And it is recorded as being such, the first kingdom that was Christian. This would have been about 50 something or whatever. And it was that way until he died. After he died, his son took over, and his son didn't like Christianity. Maybe too many rules, I don't know what. And he persecuted those who were Christians. From that time until about 400 years later, there is not a word in history or in the traditions of the church of any cloth with the face of Jesus on it. It kind of like disappeared. Then, in around 540 something, the people of Edessa had to fix the walls of the city. There had been a flood, and many of the wall structures were destroyed. When they came around to the main entrance to the city, as they were doing their repairs, they discovered a room above that main gate, and in that room was a chest, and in that chest was a cloth with a face on it. So that's where they had hid it when the son of Abgar was persecuting the Christians. And they see a number of different artistic representations that they call the image of Edessa. So up here, that's a 12th century fresco. Fresco's what you put on a bare wall. And that's kept in Gradac in Serbia, and it depicts the holy face of Edessa in the center of a piece of embroidery most probably as it may have appeared on the folded shroud. In other words, when they put the shroud in the box, they folded it up so you could not see anything except the face, this part here. That's it, nothing else. So, and then, so you wouldn't see the other thing. The burn marks, of course, weren't there at that time. That's 1,000 years later. But none of the shoulders or anything else was showing. And they put this on. This design here is actually the floral design of King Abgar. Isn't that amazing? So 1,200 years, or 1,100 years after him, they've still got that. So the bottom shows you probably how the shroud was folded to give this impression right there. Then somebody else, recently, very recently, in 2002, did some archaeological stuff in that same place. Today, Edessa is called Sanilurfa, and it's in Turkey, run by Muslims. Actually, it's been run by Muslims for a very long time. So this tile was discovered by Philip Dewald, and as you can see, it looks like Jesus. Amazing similarities, and amazing similarities to the shroud, which again is another piece of evidence that at one time, the people of Edessa did have this piece of cloth. And here's his book, and here's some more pictures of the tile that he discovered. And so, we have an acheropoitas. There is a tradition in the ancient church, especially in the East, of an icon that was not made of human hands. So what is this icon? So copies that we have are obviously copies. If some scientists took a look at this, they would see it as a copy. It's made with computer inks, archival inks. They would just take their magnifying glass, take a look at it and say, this was done by some computer ink. They'd even tell you who the company was, probably. And the same with those things there. They know those are copies or fakes. But the original one, we still don't know how that image got on there. So everything here and all the other ones that we have are obviously made of human hands. Now the Shroud of Turin and one other cloth leave us baffled as to how their image was put on them. And here's another one, the Russian image of the Acheropoitas. It's a tapestry. Then there's another story way back in about 593. This Evagrius Scholasticus wrote a story about a time in 544 when the Persians put the city to siege. And the people of Edessa prayed before the Holy Face. So this would have been after they discovered it in the chest in that room above this main gate. They prayed to that icon, and they beat the Persians. So that was considered a miracle. Today, the city looks like this. Here's another view of it. Now, there's another interesting piece of information. That cloth was found in around 544 in that chest in the wall. About 400 years later, almost to the day it seems, the Holy Face of Edessa is transferred from Edessa to Constantinople. That is history. So the question just is, well, what is the Holy Face of Edessa? And don't forget, it's called the Acheropoitas, the image not made of human hands. So what happens? In 944, the city was besieged by John Kurkuas, who was the emperor of the Eastern Empire. And it was exchanged for a group of Muslim prisoners. And the image of Edessa was taken to Constantinople, where it was received amidst great celebration by Emperor Romanus Lecapenos, who kept it in the Theotokos of the Pharos Chapel in the great palace of Constantinople. And this event is still celebrated in the Orthodox Church and in the Ukrainian Catholic Church, because our tradition is the same as the Orthodox. We just said it's time to unite with the Pope. But every year on August 16th, right after the Feast of the Assumption, which in the East we call the Dormition of Mary, it is celebrated on that day. The transfer of that icon. So again, everything we celebrate in our church, whether it's the Sunday feast days, the saints that we celebrate throughout the week and throughout the year, it's all based in reality somewhere. Nobody's making this stuff up. Not inconsequentially, the earliest known Byzantine icon of the Mandilion, or Holy Face, is preserved at St. Catherine's Monastery in Egypt, and it's dated around 945, 1 year after it was brought to Constantinople. So there's a connection. And then, shortly afterwards, there are records of liturgical services in the Church of St. Mary of Blecherne on Fridays, involving a cloth with the image of our Lord on it. That's documented. There's a picture of that beautiful church. I thought they would bring it to this one, which I think is the most beautiful church in the world, which is now, of course, a mosque again. Thank you, Erdogan. But something bad happened in 1204. It's the Fourth Crusade. They were supposed to go to Jerusalem to free the city from Muslim rule so that Christians could again safely travel to those sites and visit all the places where Jesus was. And unfortunately, along the way, they got sidetracked. They stopped by Constantinople at the behest of someone who said to them that he was really supposed to be the emperor. And he got kicked off the throne unlawfully. So they came and they put him on the throne. And for payment, because it's a huge cost to bring an army across, he told them they could loot whatever they wanted. Unfortunately, they went past just looting. It was horrible. When the Pope heard about what they'd done, he was beside himself. And he said to the leaders, "What have you done?" Because the West has always tried to reunite with the East. This, of course, blew that out of the water. And to this day, we are divided. A sad thing. So the Crusaders, while they were there, before they started doing their bad stuff, they were invited to a Friday liturgy. And there is an account of the Crusaders participating in a Friday liturgy during which a cloth with an image of the crucified Lord was made to stand up out of a box. He thought it was a display meant to inspire the fear of God into the Crusaders, because the Byzantines were afraid that the large Crusader army might turn on them, which unfortunately they did. So, but that's not our main thing here. I want to talk about that image that was made to stand up. There's an icon. It's called the icon of the extreme humility of Christ. What does it look like? An image of Jesus coming out of a box. But look at Jesus' position. Is that what he looks like on the shroud? Yes. His arms are crossed. And it's this one over this one. And that's the way the icon is. So, would this have been the cloth that was pulled up? The way they described it is that there was a bar between the middle here. And so when you pulled them up out of the box, it was like Jesus rising. So on the back, you saw the back. On the front, you saw the front. Isn't that a unique way of doing it? Anyways, those Crusaders made a mess of things. And I won't get into it. After they left the city, the shroud disappears, along with many other relics and treasures. Prior to the Crusades, it was listed among the religious treasures of the city, and after the Crusade, it no longer appears on those lists. Strangely enough, 150 years later, in 1356 AD, a French knight named Geoffrey II de Charnay claims that he actually has the real burial cloth of Jesus. And another interesting thing is that he's got the same name as another Geoffrey de Charnay, who was part of that disastrous crusade of 1204. So this Geoffrey II, he gives the shroud into the care of the canons of Liry in France. Canons would be priests associated with a particular church. So being kind of nobility, a knight has a certain level of lower nobility, but he's still got lots of money. He built a church for it. Now, would he have gone to the trouble to build a church for a fake piece of art that was supposed to be the shroud? Or would you spend that kind of money if you were convinced you had the real burial cloth of Jesus? Now, a little interesting story is that because he claimed that he had the real shroud, people were coming from around various areas of France to Liry, a little small, inconsequential town, and they were coming to venerate the shroud. Well, when you go on a pilgrimage, you don't just venerate and leave. You give offerings to the church for the upkeep of that shroud. People weren't very rich, so what turned out was that the priests in the other parishes were receiving less money from their parishioners because these parishioners were going to Liry to see the shroud. So the priests complained to the bishop. Always got to complain to the bishop. Go to the top. So the bishop wrote a letter to the anti-pope in Avignon. Yeah, the pope situation wasn't very good then either. Asking him to forbid the exposition of Descharnet's cloth. He couldn't do it because Liry wasn't in his diocese. So he goes to the Pope. So in his letter, he claims that he spoke with the artist who admitted that he had done it. Strangely enough, no other person in history has been recorded as speaking to that same artist and getting this confession from him. But he's got another reason, and maybe this is what made him tell that little white lie about the artist. Unless he meant the artist was Jesus himself, because Jesus probably did make this. And then maybe he didn't know he was actually telling the truth about that, but it didn't come out the way he meant. He also notes that the Gospels don't mention a cloth with the image of Jesus, and they wouldn't have missed anything so important. Of course, the bishop is totally wrong, because if the disciples had mentioned that there is an image on it, and that they were handling something that had touched a dead body, they would have been severely disciplined. The cloth probably confiscated by the Jerusalem authorities and destroyed. Who knows? There's no way they would have told the Jews that they had that by putting it into the gospel officially. It would not have been a good idea. So, because of this bishop's letter, all interest in the shroud died out. Because it's a fake. Who wants to go and see a fake? So it was just done. And then in 1694, a few years later, the shroud is sold by another descendant of the Descharnet family, who had it, to the House of Savoy, which was the family of the kings of Italy. And their home is in Turin, still today, as I showed you at the beginning, where they built a chapel in which it is kept and occasionally displayed. And that is the church. You already saw that at the beginning there. And in 1983, King Umberto II bequeathed the shroud to the Roman Catholic Church. So finally, after all these years, the Roman Catholic Church is the official owner of the shroud. And it's under the care of the Archbishop of Turin. So you can, but I think you have to be a bishop, you can ask for an authorized copy of that one. They have to give it away for free, but you pay for printing it and shipping it. And I really don't think anybody except bishops can ask for it. So my bishop, Bishop David Motiuk, I gave a shroud presentation in Caroline, Alberta, and he gave me a ride there and he gave me a ride back. So I was talking to him about it, and I was mentioning how nice it would be to have a real full-size copy of the shroud. And he said, yeah, it would be nice, yeah. And that's the end of it. I didn't hear any more of that. A year later, I'm told, Ed, we have a copy of the shroud from the Archbishop of Turin. And sure enough, we have it. Yeah, it doesn't look like this. It's a recent picture. I think it was taken in 2013. But if you want to see the way it looks now, it's much nicer than this. It's not wrinkled like this. I wish I had a better way of storing this so it didn't look like that. But anyways, it gives you some idea. The patches have been removed. They were removed in 2002. So they kind of tried to clean it up, because now it's going to be displayed in that airtight case that I told you about, and it won't ever be folded or rolled up again. So when it moves complete, total, like that. So this is the way it looks now in the church. Not in two halves, but those are no patches are there. It's just the holes are there, so you can see straight through. Now, somebody else did some more research looking at different pictures of the shroud. It seems I don't have access to these pictures because what she detected I have yet to find. Barbara Frail used computer imaging and probably better pictures than I have, and she has identified writing on the shroud that identify the man as Jesus of Nazareth. And further, she claims that the handwriting style is the same as what was used to write the Titulus Crucis. Have you heard of the Titulus Crucis? No. But in the Gospel it says that Pilate had a sign written in 3 languages and put on the cross. So this is where she says that writing is. So on the right-hand side, that's the Latin. This is the Greek. And some of these letters in here are Hebrew, I think. Yeah, the one on the bottom there is Hebrew. I can't read Hebrew. Now, this is the last part of the Titulus Crucis that we have. When Helen, the mother of Constantine, who made Christianity legal in the Roman Empire, went to Jerusalem looking for relics, she asked the Christian community, where are the relics of Jesus' crucifixion and death? And they brought her to the tomb. Everything was in the tomb. The girl did not have any education in handling relics. She took them all out. So now I think all we have are splinters left of the Holy Cross. We do have the Spear of Longinus. I think it's in a museum in Vienna. And we have one part of the Titulus Crucis left, because when she got a hold of that one, she split it up into 3 parts, gave the Hebrew to the church in Jerusalem. That is gone. She took the Greek part and sent it to the church in Constantinople. And that part is gone. All we have left is the Latin part. And that is in this church in Rome. The Basilica di Santa Croce in Jerusalem in Rome. And that goes back to 325. It has been there solidly. So if the handwriting on this is the same as what is on the shroud, that also pushes the dating of the shroud way past what those poor carbon daters came up with. So if you wanted to go to see it in Rome, it is held in this reliquary, and it has a number of relics of Christ's crucifixion, including the sign. So it's in that thing there. Now, to clean it up so you can see what it said, the top, that's the Hebrew, the middle, that's the Greek, and the bottom one is the Latin. Now you should immediately notice, no, I don't have the picture backwards. This is actually the way it is. It goes from the right to the left. That's the way Jewish writers write. All Jewish script is done that way. So we can ascertain that the person that wrote this was a Jewish scribe. Then it says, Jesus Nazarenus Rex Judeorum. Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews. Now, let's take a look at icons and the dating of the shroud. So many icons created after 600 AD have similarities to the face on the Shroud of Turin. These icons can be found in many parts of Christendom. 2 lawyers took these icons and kind of resized them, put them into, carousel, slide projectors. And the reason they did this is because that's what you do to find out if the fingerprints at the scene of the crime match any particular fingerprints that you have on file. So what you do is you take a picture of those, you shine up the picture of the crime scene fingerprints, and you hold it steady. In the other projector, You go through a whole pile of possibilities. And you try to put it so that both images are right on top of each other. If there is movement, you know that there is differences and that's the wrong fingerprint. If there isn't movement, you know you've got an identification, and that's the guy whose fingerprints are at the crime scene. Now they did the same idea with the shroud pictures and the icons. It was a little harder, but they worked hard at it. They found 31 points of possible congruity. Not all icons have all of them, but many good icons have many of them. So some of the ones I mentioned already are that rectangle from the phylactery, the triangle that comes down, and the various size of the eyes relatively, how the beard is formed, the wide hair, etc. Now before that cloth was discovered in the wall in Edessa, everybody made icons, statues, whatever, of Jesus according to what they thought he should look like. So this right here is a statue called the Shepherd of Hermas. It's found in the Roman catacombs before 500 AD. When I first saw that, I was wondering, well, why is this in my, who cares about a Shepherd of Hermas? Hermas is where the statue was discovered. That's not who it is. Who is it? Jesus, the Good Shepherd. I didn't recognize him. He doesn't have a beard, and his hair too curly. So, but after 500, here is an image on a vase in Syria. Doesn't that look more like Jesus that we know? Yeah. Here is Christ Pantocrator, 6th century, and likewise in St. Catherine's in Sinai. That's the model. This has most of the points of similarity with the shroud. And you can't really see the it's too washed out. You can't tell the rectangle and all those other things. Here you can tell it's a little coarser. You can see the box. You can see the lines coming up from the phylactery. You can't see the triangle though. This one here, the box is more stylized. It looks like an oval, but it's there. And you definitely have the triangle. Those aren't facial features. Then you've got an 11th century mosaic. And you can see the lines across the forehead. That's the string that held up the phylactery. And you've got, the box is quite stylized, but the triangle is there. Likewise with this one. Many of those marks are there. And a gold coin. So that again you can see is Jesus. Now, let's talk about three-dimensional information. This is really amazing. Again, it's a game changer for the shroud. So, the people who went in 1978 to do the scientific study of the shroud, when they came back home, they had a whole pile of pictures. One of the guys was involved in NASA. And NASA developed a bit of software called the VP8 Image Analyzer. And they would put photographs that the satellites that they sent to different distant celestial bodies, the moon, whatever, Mars, and they would take those photographs, put it into this program, and it would, using the information in the photograph, make a three-dimensional representation of the surface of the planet. So one of them got the idea, hey, let's try that with your picture. So he took his nice navy picture, stuck it into the VP8 image analyzer, boom, it came out a mess. There is no 3D information in a two-dimensional photograph. So then one of the other ones said, let's put a picture of the shroud in there, see what it does. And that's what it did. There is 3D information on the shroud, and it's real. And those look like coins. And somebody said, oh, I bet they put coins on there. And that's the blood. But you see, the things on the face that are supposed to be up are up, those that are supposed to be down are down, and it's got that three-dimensional thing to it. Now, one group of people really went into this, and they cleaned it up a lot with newer software. You saw how that's green. You know why that's green. It's not because they're computers from Mars. It's because when computers first started out, they were all green. When I had my Apple IIe, that monitor was green. It wouldn't show anything else except green or black. or in between, nothing in between, nothing else. So when we cleaned it up with color computers, that's what they came up with as a computerized 3D image of Jesus taken from the information that is on the shroud. It's there. Their pictures are better. The same group went on to do a bronze bust of Jesus. And they worked a couple more years, and then they got the entire body, everything perfect the way it's supposed to be. Isn't that wild? So you can check that out. It's on the internet. And here's the coin. It's a bit of a stretch. So, I mean, it's hard to see that. You have to really take a look. So there's the C, A, and there should be an I there. And the three letters, you can see that here, C-A-I. And that's the first part of the chi, or in the name Caesar. And that was a lepton that was minted by Pontius Pilate around the year 30 AD. Again, if you're a carbon dater, you just don't want to know this stuff, right? Then someone else, taking the 3D properties of the shroud and using, you know how they got those, what do they call those, 3D glasses? So sometimes in order to really interpret a 3D picture, you have to wear these glasses. I think one side is green and the other side is red or something. And then when you look at something, all of a sudden it just pops out of the page, even if it's two-dimensional. Well, that's the kind of information that's on the shroud. So he found 3 letters under the chin of the man on the shroud. You got to take a look at the video if you ever have a chance to find him. He's a Dutch researcher. He's a calligrapher. He's an artist. And he likes to research things. So the 3 letters there spell the word lamb. Is that a connection to Jesus? Oh, yeah. That's the first thing that John the Baptist said when he saw Jesus. There is the Lamb of God. And the Lamb of God is the one who is slain for the forgiveness of our sins. And the people of Jerusalem at that time really knew that, understood that well, because they had to offer blood sacrifices for sin every month. Yeah. And it's hard to see, but he's got a 3D, and we don't have the 3D glasses, so you can't see it, but it's right in here. It's raised up. He says it's an oval, maybe a piece of wood, and the letters themselves are raised up there. Then there's the International Institute of Advanced Studies of Space Representation Sciences. Whoa, how's that for a name? Actually, these are the guys who did the bust and the full statue. But they also discovered something else on the shroud that just blew my mind away. I just recently discovered this. I should have noticed it later, but I haven't had time. It's a little hard to wrap your mind around, or maybe not for you, but for me it is. So what they did is they discovered that there was movement. You've heard of stroboscopic photographs? It's where you do a photograph, but instead of having a steady light, and so that the object is in one place, you strobe it, and it gives you an image 10 times, 5 times, whatever it is. And they say that is what is on the shroud. So they show this, and they say this is movement. So that the original would have just, let's see, this, and then all of a sudden it switches to this. So they use different pictures than we do. So when a photographer takes a picture, the depth of field is important, and if you have the wrong depth of field, you won't see this. So they figured it out so you can see that, and I'm sure you can see this right here. That's actually the thumb. And it's interesting, somebody else pointed out, that this is the position of the hand that the Eastern priests use to bless. They don't bless like karate chop. It's this way. And the reason they hold their hand this way is because God is a Trinity, and Jesus is God and man. So everything in the East always has this symbolism. It's just amazing. And that's how Jesus blesses. That's on the icon of Christ the teacher. Jesus holds his hands like this in that icon. So that was amazing. Here, oh, you can hardly see it. They say that the image of the nail can be seen in 3 positions as it actually falls out of the hand right there. So here, there's a little red triangle. That's the nail still in the hand, pointing straight down. You're looking at the top of the nail head. Then there is off to the side at an angle, and then here it is completely out of the hand, which would make sense because they didn't have time to do everything, and if they would have pulled out the nails, that would have had more blood come out, and you don't want to lose the blood. They had to put everything into the tomb that touched his blood, because blood is the essence of life. So they had to bury all of those things. And that's why some of those other cloths are there, because they soaked up the blood as they were taking Jesus down from the cross. Now, I mentioned more than one cloth. This is cloth, but the Gospels mentioned cloths. So let's take a look at that in the Gospel again. Now on the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene came to the tomb early while it was still dark and saw the stone had been taken away from the tomb. So she ran and went to Simon Peter and the other disciple whom Jesus loved and said to them, "They have taken the Lord out of the tomb." Oh, let's skip that. I should go right down to here. Okay. So, not lying with the linen cloths, but rolled up in a place by itself. Okay, so they mentioned that. And then we have this. This is not in Jerusalem, but it came from Jerusalem. It is in Oviedo in Spain. In Jerusalem around 615, those nasty Persians decided to attack Jerusalem. When the Christian community in Jerusalem heard that, they immediately took all of their most treasured relics, put them into this box, which they call the Ark, and they shipped it off to Alexandria. It stayed in Alexandria in the Christian community for a while. Then the Muslims rose to power after 630, and they started to sweep across North Africa. When they got to Egypt, the Christian community sent it to Libya. When the Muslims came all the way across Africa to Libya, those Christian communities sent it to southern Spain. Well, the Muslim onslaught did not stop there. It continued, and they crossed the Strait of Gibraltar into southern Spain, at which time the Christian community in Libya or in southern Spain sent it up to the north of Spain to Oviedo, where it is to this day. And it is documented every step of the way. So what is so important about this box? This is the other cloth. It is called now the Cloth of Oviedo. It does not have any image on it, but it has blood stains. And the blood type is AB, the same as what is on the shroud. The other thing that is amazing is that the stain patterns are the same as what is on the shroud. Here is cleared up for you a little bit more. And you can see those stains. And that cloth has been in Oviedo since 1113. It's the same blood type as on the shroud. And the blood stains match the size and shape of blood stains on the head and neck of the shroud image. This evidence means that both cloths touched the same head at the same time, some point in history. It can be accurately dated to 614 when it was recorded that the cloth left Jerusalem just before the Persian invasion. So that's an amazing thing. Again, the carbon daters don't look at that kind of stuff, but they should, because that really places the shroud at least down to 614. But in Jerusalem, they knew that cloth came from Jesus' tomb, that came from taking Jesus down from the cloth. Then there's another one, the Cloth of Manopalo. This one is made of byssus, which is an excretion of muscles used to attach to rocks. In most Bibles, it's translated as fine linen. It's very expensive. It's almost transparent. It lasts for thousands of years. And was it originally from St. Peter's? So they think that when the Lutherans came down to sack Rome in the Vatican, somebody took it from there and brought it to Manopalo. We're not quite sure. The story isn't clear, but it is in Manopalo. I had to talk to a priest friend of mine because I had never heard of this, and he said, "I was just in Italy. Have you ever heard of the Cloth of Manopalo?" I said, "No, what is that?" He said, "It's a cloth with an image of Jesus on it." And he explained what byssus is and everything else like that. He says you can almost see your hand through it. It's so transparent. If you put a newspaper right up to it, you can read it. It's kept in this frame. And at one point, somebody said, "Gee, that's an old frame. We should take it out of that old frame and put it into a nice new gold frame." So they did. The image disappeared. Well, there was trouble in Manopalo. So they took it out of that and put it back into the original frame, and the picture came back. So nobody's playing with that anymore. Here is Pope Benedict venerating it. And when you take that image of the Cloth of Manopalo and superimpose it on the negative of the shroud face, the fit is remarkable. Perfect, they would say. So, is the Shroud of Turin the Shroud of Christ? Tradition says it is. Lots of the stories that we have looked at and all the other evidence says yes, it is. Iconography says yes, it is. A lot of scientific evidence, the pollens, the wood grains, the soil, etc., they all say yes. The images of the flowers, they all say yes, it is. But some scientists say no, despite the amount of evidence that points to yes. And that's because we are free to deny reality, but not forever. So if it's authentic, what does it mean for us? It means that it's a miracle as well as a message. A miracle because no human being could have put such an image on a cloth, not in medieval times and not today. We still do not have that technology. It's a visual message, a graphic, showing how Jesus died for us to save us from our sins. And it shows us how much he loves us. And Jesus said, there is no greater love than to lay down your life for a friend. And then he did just that to show us his love for us. He also said, I am the resurrection and the life. So he showed us what is in store for us. So in all the accusations of the indifference of God, these accusations fall apart at the foot of the cross. What more could be said to reveal the profound love of a God who would suffer with us and for us? And that's it. Now, it's still 1 minute to 4. So if anyone has a question, I suppose you could come, you could ask. Go ahead.
My question is about, you said the other cross, right?
Yes.
Along the station of the cross, we have one where Veronica writes the face of Jesus.
Right.
And the image on the cross. So is there any story about that cross?
Well, I'm glad you asked that because I forgot to talk about it. In St. Peter's, there is a pillar, and the pillar is a drawer, and the label underneath that drawer says, the Cloth of Veronica. And when you go there and you ask someone to show you that, they won't, because it's empty. So some people are thinking that the cloth there is this one. It makes sense. This one is in color, by the way. And it's also with Jesus with his eyes open. Now, keeping in mind that the shroud itself shows movement, it would make sense that if this very expensive cloth would have been put on Jesus, and it was used in the burial of pharaohs. Nobody less than a pharaoh had one of those things. So that's why when they say Jesus died as a criminal but was buried as a king, they mean it. Like everything that was used to bury him was that way. And the other thing to note is that the name Veronica actually comes from two Greek words, vira ikona, which means true image. So the story of Veronica, was there actually a woman that wiped his face? Maybe Christian piety made that up to explain it, but there is a real one, and this was in the tomb. So past that, I can't say anything more. I just don't know. Okay? Thank you very much for joining me. And thank you for inviting me. I really appreciate sharing this beloved topic with you. And it's been great being here this afternoon. You're very welcome. So God bless you.
It's all the week.
Yeah.
Kindly wait in your place. Let us leave as we should be leaving. And get the volunteers. Stay back for the mass.